Planning for the loss of a spouse can be such a difficult thing to do. It's so emotional, and it's not something that you ever want to think about. But it's really important to know that someday it is going to happen. And what are you going to do? And how are you going to prepare for that to occur? Find out why life insurance is not the only strategy for preparing for the loss of a spouse. Welcome back to Consider This Program. I'm your host, Jamie Burton.
And I'm Grant Soliven.
Thanks. So happy to have you here today, Grant.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
So we have St. Patrick's Day coming up this week.
Absolutely. Wear your green. Don't get pinched.
So we're talking about luck, how you don't want to have luck be the center of your plan, your financial plan. We want to make sure that you have processes in place and reasons for each thing that you're doing inside of your financial plan. One thing that is so hard to talk about when you are creating this financial plan is the good, the bad, and the ugly of life. One of those things is the loss of a spouse. Nobody wants to think about it. Nobody wants to have to plan for it or prepare for it. But it's so important to have a plan in place for if that were to happen. So today, Grant's going to kind of walk us through life insurance. Is it necessary? Do we need life insurance? Does it make sense for you? Why would you buy life insurance? And is it really the best thing to have in your portfolio going forward?
Right.
So Grant, do you want to tell us a little bit about why we would purchase life insurance?
Yeah, 100%. So really, when you evaluate the good, bad, and ugly life and you're looking at fixed insurance products as a solution to a type of problem, you really first have to take a step back and analyze what you need it for and then what types of products are out there for you to utilize. So why would we need life insurance? You know, FEG, we believe life insurance serves two purposes. It helps create liquidity when liquidity is gone, and it helps to essentially protect an estate or help with the taxation of an estate in the event that something happens to a significant other, especially someone who's a breadwinner of a certain family. And so when you look at it that way, you know, we often get questions, Jamie, of, okay, so how much do I buy? What should I buy, et cetera? And when it comes down to that liquidity replacement, I always like to guide people to use the acronym LIFE. It's kind of funny because life insurance, right? So LIFE, essentially, L stands for liabilities. So what liabilities do you have that need to be covered in the event that an income-generating spouse is no longer here with the family? So that could be, some families wrap in certain things like obviously the mortgage, cars, et cetera, and, you know, credit cards and things. But there are other liabilities that we have seen families wrap in, you know, business loans, et cetera. Then there's the I, and this is the income replacement. So I never, ever guide anyone to put one spouse in a position when they're one argument away from being a life insurance check, myself included. And so, you know, you're not trying to replace all of the income potential of an individual, but, you know, is it 50% of income? Is that the liquidity we need as a family based on our lifestyle? Is it 75? Is it 25? Right? Using that number can help you guide you to the right, you know, essentially death benefit. F, final expenses. I don't know about you guys, but, you know, final expenses aren't getting cheaper, especially with the supply chain issues we've suffered. It's probably even more expensive now than ever. And then with inflation being what it is as well. And then education. Some families believe very highly in education, Jamie, and they want, if in the event they lose a spouse, education to be paid for. And so you can wrap that into the overall death benefit. Now, once you have that number, right, and it could be 500,000, 4 million, whatever the number is based on your own math, the question comes now to is, now that we know why we're going to get it, what do we get? Mm-hmm. Because oftentimes the bad luck question of, you know, is owning insurance really that important? Well, it depends on what type. And so when you're dealing with a life insurance salesman, you just got to remember that how the commission structure works. Okay, so the more the permanent a product is, like whole life insurance or UL, VUL insurance, the more commission they're going to get paid. So they're going to lead you in that direction. Okay. Now, obviously, permanent insurance stuff does have its place and can fit and fill needs accordingly. But again, they're very specific niche needs. And if you have questions about that, please contact our team. We'll help you go through that analysis with you. But generally speaking, a lot of times the insurance we lead many of our families to is just term insurance, 10-year, 15-year term insurance. And really you want to ladder that over time because essentially as you build more assets and equity and as your income continues to get your family through these education events, you pay off liabilities, et cetera, you need less. And so the good one of his philosophies is, get 10-year term insurance and then reduce it or increase it over time as you need. Now, obviously, you have to worry about insurability. So every time you get new insurance, you have to take a blood test, you have to do a medical exam, etc. And sometimes honestly, for me, I look at those as free medical exams to make sure my body's still in good health. But really, when you look at those, that's how it analyzes how you get a number. And when it comes to what type, there's fixed, there's term. We generally lean towards term to fill most of the death benefit because of the cost. And then if permanent's part of the equation, we definitely talk through why.
Mm-hmm. And when we're looking at the families that we take care of, when we see those families, they're typically at retirement age. They're getting ready to retire, or they're in retirement. When they're planning for the loss of a spouse, they're looking at this risk management, the good, the bad, the ugly of life. Mm-hmm. Is it really life insurance that they look at that's going to be a way that they prepare for the death of a spouse? Or what is it that we're really focusing on when we're having those discussions?
Yeah, 100%, Jamie. And for the families that are in at the tail end of preservation and getting into distribution, realistically, the biggest element of the plan we're focusing on is really income generation, right? So income protection, lifestyle protection is what I kind of like to call it. And whether that's done with a life insurance policy, that is great. But oftentimes we find that many of our families coming into the stage of retirement are on the tail end of a policy. Maybe they bought a 20 or 30-year policy in the past, and they're trying to decide whether to keep it or not. But realistically, going back to what we said earlier, it's kind of figuring out what their standard of living is, breaking that down. So looking at your life after work, in the event of losing a spouse, did you have an idea of what your fixed and social expenses were? Can you manage those without them? More importantly, do they decrease now that spouse is gone? And in preparing for that, do we have enough assets to meet the standard of living goal we have and need? And unfortunately, what we find, Jamie, in our practice is when a family loses a spouse, they don't go out and just spend more money, right? They actually oftentimes spend a lot more time with family, and they don't spend a whole lot in that event, especially if they lost a spouse later in their years. So really, life insurance, we find it to be it's something that's used if it's still intact, if it's more of a permanent policy. But really, what we're doing in this stage of the game, especially if you're in later years of planning, is do you have the assets and income that's going to maintain your standard of living going forward?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And a part of that conversation on figuring out if you do have those assets and the income going forward is that your spouse knows about it. Mm-hmm. One of the big thing that we see is that one spouse takes care of all of the finances. They take care of paying the bills, writing the checks. They know what's in their investment accounts. They know how much they're saving, how much it takes to live off of each year. One spouse knows all of that information, and the other spouse just isn't interested, or it's too much for them. It doesn't interest them, so they just kind of step back and don't want to know about it, or they just really trust their spouse that they don't need to get involved in that. And then when they get to a point where their spouse passes away, they just have no idea what's going on. We've had, a widow bring in a box of papers saying, I don't know if I'm broke or not. I don't know if I'm going to be able to continue living the lifestyle that I live because I'm not sure what my husband did. I'm not sure how much he saved, if he had life insurance. And I just don't know. Can you help me? So having those really hard conversations with your spouse to make sure they know exactly what's going on. They don't need to be involved in the day-to-day. They don't have to be a big part of it, but they at least need to know what's going on.
Huge. And Jamie, if I may add one other thing, we have great resources on the website, yourlifeafterwork.com. We've created these types of checklists that you can use. So if you're happily married and you're listening to this for the first time, you're like, wait a second, am I prepared? Do I need to bring in that box of financial documents? Go check out our checklist and start having and engaging in the conversations of what you need to start looking at having in the event you lose a spouse, so you can start to prepare. This goes back to a recording I think we did back in February 11th, Jamie, where we brought in Tom Hurley to talk about estate planning, which is a huge element of our overall planning. And having proper estate plan documents in place can also help in that situation as well. So, less about the insurance piece, more about who's going to control the income and assets going forward, having an estate document that outlines that could be powerful as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And today, we're talking about luck. And a lot of when you're making decisions and hoping that luck is on your side, you're making those decisions based on things that you used to know, things that used to be true to you. So a lot of times when we have families come in, they're talking about having this life insurance and they were told about what is called the banking strategy. Mm-hmm. Can you go over what the banking strategy is and why it is not the strategy our families need to use?
Yeah. So remember, a lot of things change along the way, and inflation's totally a different monster than it was in the past. Mm-hmm. It's harder to generate return on certain instruments than it was in the past. And here's what happens when you were given a whole life policy and you were sold on being your own banker. So essentially what can happen is you can have a permanent policy. You can put your premium in it. Premium then gets broken down into cost of insurance, but it also grows to this thing called cash value. And whatever the internal rate is, the capture rate on that cash value is in that year for the given insurance company gets added to it. And so you can grow that cash value. And the sales pitch is, well, that grows income tax free. It grows tax-free like a Roth. And then, Jamie, if you ever needed the cash, you can just pull it out, borrow against yourself. You owe yourself the interest rate, and you pay yourself back. And so then at that point, you just rebuild the cash value. And if you don't pay it back, don't worry. The death benefit will cover the difference. Well, here's the problem, folks. These policies, number one, on the fixed side, are relatively expensive, depending on what kind of health risk you have. And number two, that only works if you follow through. And most life insurance policies that are done that way end up being cannibalized anyway. You end up paying income tax and all that growth. So it's not a great strategy, especially with there's so many other alternatives out there for us to use. And it's really just a way to sell people on fear, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There are so many things that go into life insurance and everyday financial decisions that are made for you today and in your future. If that's something that you want to do on your own, that's your business. But if you want to have that decision help being made by a fiduciary, that's our business. You can give us a call at 800-928-4001. Ask for Brittany. She'll hook you up with one of our advisors and schedule a next steps meeting. We'll talk about what you should do today, what you should do in your future, and if you decide to partner with Financial Enhancement Group, what we can do for you. Go to our website, yourlifeafterwork.com, sign up for our market cover where we're going to talk about what we see going on today in the economy and in the market. And also on our website, you can find a lot of great articles that we've written on these very topics to help go more into depth. Thank you for joining us today.